The headlights swept across my driveway at 5:40 in the morning, and by the time I'd pulled on a robe and made it to the front window, there was already a flatbed tow truck backed halfway up my gravel drive in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, its amber hazards poolsing against the fog rolling off the water, and my son-in-law Preston standing off to the side with his phone held up, recording every second of it. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest of this story. I have owned that boat, a 31-foot Sea Ray I named the Aliner after my late wife, for 6 years. I paid it off in full 4 years ago. There was no reason on this earth for a repossession crew to be standing in my driveway, attaching a winch cable to its trailer hitch at dawn. And there was even less reason for my daughter's husband to be standing there filming it like a man capturing content for a highlight reel, rather than a family member witnessing what appeared, at first glance, to be his father-in-law's financial ruin. "Sir, I need you to step back," the lead repo agent said as I came down the porch steps in my slippers, a heavy-set man with a clipboard and a name patch reading Dale. "We've got a valid order here for recovery of this vessel. Bank of the Lakes Financial, account number ending in 4471. "That's not my account number," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, because some part of my 68-year-old brain, slower to wake than it used to be but no less sharp once it got going, had already begun assembling pieces that didn't fit. "I don't have a loan with Bank of the Lakes. I paid this boat off in 2020. I have the title in a fireproof box in my study, free and clear." "Dad," Preston called out from where he stood, his phone still recording, "just let them do their job. This is what happens when people fall behind. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Something in the specific, performative gentleness of his tone, a circumflex, the tone of a man narrating a scene for an audience rather than speaking to family in an actual crisis, a circumflex, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a way that had nothing to do with the October cold. "Preston, why are you filming this?" "Documentation," he said smoothly. "In case there's ever a dispute, you'll thank me later, trust me." I did not, in that moment, trust him at all. A circumflex. To understand what happened over the following 72 hours, you need to understand a few things about my family, and about the 18 months leading up to that cold October dawn. My name is Walter Kowalczyk. I spent 31 years as a machinist, and then a shop foreman at a manufacturing plant outside Milwaukee, before retiring 6 years ago with a modest but comfortable pension, a paid-off house on the shore of Lake Geneva that had belonged to my wife's family for 2 generations, and the Aliner, the one genuine indulgence I'd ever allowed myself, purchased the year I retired with money I'd saved specifically for that purpose across 3 decades of careful, disciplined budgeting. My wife, Aliner, passed 18 months before this story begins, from a stroke that took her suddenly on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while she was gardening in the yard we'd shared for 34 years. I will not pretend that grief hasn't shaped every decision I've made since then, including, I now understand with painful clarity, the decision that put my daughter's family in a position to do what they did. My daughter, Renata, married Preston Vance 9 years ago. I had liked him well enough at the wedding, a circumflex charming, ambitious, the kind of young man who talked confidently about business plans and 5-year goals in a way that impressed people at dinner parties, even when the specifics never quite materialized into anything concrete. Over the years, Preston had moved through a series of ventures, a circumflex, a craft brewery that folded after 2 years, a real estate flipping operation that lost money on 3 consecutive properties, most recently a cryptocurrency consulting business that I understood, from the little Renata shared with me, was struggling considerably despite Preston's continued insistence at family gatherings that it was about to turn a corner. 8 months after Aliner died, Preston had approached me with an idea. He explained, with the smooth confidence I'd come to recognize as his default register, that he'd found a way to help me optimize my finances in my grief and my retirement, a circumflex specifically. He suggested I add him as a joint signer on several of my accounts, ostensibly so he could help manage bill payments and financial paperwork during what he gently described as a difficult time to be handling everything alone. He framed it as a temporary arrangement, a kindness from a son-in-law to a grieving father-in-law, nothing more. I want to be honest about my own culpability here, because I think it matters to the rest of this story. I agreed. I was tired and sad, and genuinely overwhelmed by a mountain of paperwork Alina had always handled without my ever fully understanding the details, and Preston's offer at the time felt like a mercy rather than a maneuver. I signed papers at a bank branch he'd selected, papers he assured me were standard joint account authorization forms, papers I did not read as carefully as I should have because I trusted, foolishly, that my daughter's husband had my best interests at heart. What I did not understand until that October morning, watching a repo crew attach a winch cable to my boat trailer, while my son-in-law filmed it with a strange, unreadable satisfaction, was that those papers had done considerably more than authorize Preston to help pay my utility bills. A circumflex. Dale, I said, keeping my voice level, I need to see that order. The actual documentation, not just a clipboard summary. Dale, to his credit, seemed like a man who took his job seriously rather than a man enjoying the discomfort of the people he served orders to. He handed me the clipboard, and I read through the paperwork with the same careful attention I'd once applied to reading blueprints on a factory floor, the habit of 31 years refusing to abandon me even at 5:40 in the morning in my bathrobe. The order named Alien Holder A Circumflex Bank of the Lakes Financial A Circumflex against a boat titled to me, Walter J. Kowalczyk, secured by a loan taken out 14 months earlier for the amount of $42,000. 14 months earlier was 3 months after Preston had first suggested the joint account arrangement. I never took out a loan against this boat, I said. I paid this boat off years before this loan was supposedly issued. Sir, the title search we ran shows a lien filed against the vessel 14 months ago. If you believe there's an error, you'll need to dispute it with the lender directly. I'm just executing a valid court order for recovery. Then I need you to hold off, I said. For 1 hour. Give me 1 hour to make some phone calls, and if I can't produce evidence this is a mistake, take the boat. But I am telling you, as a man who has never missed a payment on anything in his entire life, that something is deeply wrong here, and I would ask you, professional to professional, for the courtesy of an hour to prove it. Dale glanced at his watch, then at Preston, who had lowered his phone slightly, his expression flickering a circumflex just for a second, just long enough for me to catch it a circumflex with something that looked considerably less like sympathy and considerably more like irritation at an obstacle he hadn't anticipated. 1 hour, Dale said. That's it. I've got 3 more recoveries scheduled this morning. A circumflex. I called my bank first, the local branch I'd used for 40 years, and asked to speak with the manager, a woman named Carol Ostrander who had known Alina and me since before Renata was born. Carol, hearing the specifics of what I was describing, told me she'd pull records immediately and call me back within 20 minutes. Then I called my daughter. Renata picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. Dad, it's not even 6. What's wrong? Renata, I need you to come to the house right now. There's a repo truck in the driveway trying to take the Alina, and Preston is standing here filming it instead of helping me figure out what's happening. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Preston's there. Dad, Preston left for a business trip to Chicago 2 days ago. He told me he wouldn't be back until Thursday. Something cold settled in my stomach, colder even than the October fog outside. He's standing in my driveway right now, Renata. I'm looking at him. I'm coming over, she said, her voice suddenly sharp and awake. Dad, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, just wait for me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at Preston, who had resumed filming, angling his phone now to capture the tow truck's winch cable drawing taut against the boat trailer's hitch. Preston, I said, your wife tells me you're supposed to be in Chicago on a business trip. For the first time since he'd arrived at my house that morning, something like genuine alarm crossed his face, a circumflex quick, but unmistakable, the look of a man realizing a carefully constructed timeline had just developed a crack. Change of plans, he said. Flight got moved up. I wanted to be here to support you through this, Walter, that's all. Support me by filming my humiliation before 6 in the morning. Documentation, he repeated, though the word came out considerably less smoothly than it had the first time. A circumflex. Carol Ostrander called back 19 minutes later, and what she told me confirmed the shape of the nightmare I'd already begun to suspect. Walter, I pulled the full transaction history on the joint account you set up with Preston 14 months ago. There's a lot here, and I don't think you're going to like any of it. 14 months ago, 3 withdrawals were made from that joint account, structured just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, totaling just over $28,000 over the course of 6 weeks. Around that same time, a new loan application was filed with Bank of the Lakes Financial, using your boat as collateral, a circumflex, a boat that, according to our own records here at the credit union, you'd paid off in full 4 years prior. The loan officer who processed that application at Bank of the Lakes has a note in the file referencing a joint applicant who handled the bulk of the paperwork and documentation, which suggests to me that whoever filed this loan had access to your original title documents and enough of your personal information to represent themselves as authorized to act on your behalf. Preston, I said, and it wasn't a question. I can't confirm that from what I'm looking at, Walter, but I can tell you the loan proceeds a circumflex $42,000, minus fees. A circumflex were deposited into an account that isn't yours or your joint account with Preston. It's a separate account entirely, one I don't have visibility into from where I sit, but given everything else here, I'd be very surprised if it doesn't trace back to him. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, watching through the window as Dale's crew continued preparing the Aliner for towing, watching my son-in-law film the entire process with an expression I now understood, retroactively, as something closer to triumph than sympathy. Carol, I need you to help me stop this, right now, whatever it takes. I'm already on it, she said. I'm calling Bank of the Lakes directly, and I'm also going to connect you with an attorney I trust, someone who handles exactly this kind of fraud case. Walter, I want you to understand something clearly. What you're describing, someone using your identity and your assets to secure a loan without your knowledge or consent, that's not just a financial dispute. That's a crime. A serious one. A circumflex. Renata arrived at the house 11 minutes later, still in the sweatshirt and jeans she'd clearly thrown on without thinking, her face pale with a fury I had rarely seen from my usually mild-mannered daughter. She marched straight past the tow truck, past Dale and his crew, directly to where Preston stood with his phone still raised. "Turn that off," she said. "Turn it off right now, Preston." "Ren, I'm just documenting." Documenting what exactly? Your own father-in-law losing his boat over a loan he never took out. Turn it off. Preston lowered the phone slowly, and I watched something shift in his expression, a circumflex, the smooth confidence finally cracking under the weight of his wife's fury, revealing, underneath it, something considerably more frightened. "Ren, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you told me you'd be in Chicago until Thursday, and instead you're standing in my father's driveway at dawn filming a Repo crew take his boat. Explain the $28,000 that disappeared from the joint account you convinced him to set up to help with his grief. Because that's what Dad's credit union manager just told me on the phone in my car, Preston, and I am asking you, right now, in front of him, to explain exactly what you've done." I had never, in 9 years of watching Preston operate with an easy, unshakable confidence at every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every casual conversation where he talked with such conviction about business ventures that never quite materialized, seen him look as genuinely cornered as he looked standing in my driveway that morning, his wife's fury cutting through whatever careful narrative he'd been constructing. "The crypto consulting business," he said finally, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "It wasn't just struggling, Ren. It collapsed. Completely. 6 months ago. I owed money to people I shouldn't have owed money to, the kind of people who don't send polite reminder letters when payments are late. I needed cash, fast, and Walter's boat was paid off, sitting there as an asset nobody was actively monitoring. And I thought I thought I could take out a small loan against it, quietly, pay it back before anyone ever noticed, and nobody would ever have to know." "You forged my father's signature," Renata said, "and it wasn't a question either. I had access to his documents. I had power of attorney for the account management that gave me enough. Power of attorney to pay his utility bills, Preston, not to mortgage his boat behind his back. I was going to fix it," Preston said, and there was something genuinely desperate in his voice now, the sound of a man watching the last thread of a lie unravel completely. "I was going to pay off the loan before it ever came to this. I swear to you, Ren, I never meant for it to get this far." "Then why?" I said, speaking for the first time since Renata had arrived, my voice quiet but carrying enough weight that both of them turned toward me. "Are you standing in my driveway filming it happen? If you're so ashamed of what you did, so determined to fix it before anyone noticed, why film the exact moment it all falls apart?" Preston had no answer for that, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. A circumflex that, whatever his original panic-driven scheme had been, some part of him, in these final days before the loan's default finally caught up with all of us, had shifted from damage control into something considerably darker. A calculated decision to document my humiliation, perhaps for some twisted justification he'd later offer, perhaps simply because watching an old man lose the one indulgence he'd ever allowed himself had become, somewhere along the way, a source of satisfaction he could no longer fully disguise. A circumflex. Dale, to his credit, held off on completing the tow once Carol Ostrander's attorney contacted a circumflex, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ingrid Bauer, who specialized in financial elder fraud. A circumflex reached Bank of the Lakes Financial directly and explained the situation in terms specific enough that the bank's own compliance department flagged the loan for immediate internal review. By 9 that morning, less than 4 hours after the tow truck's headlights had first swept across my gravel driveway, the recovery order was formally suspended pending investigation, and Dale's crew disconnected the winch cable from the Leaner's trailer hitch and drove away, leaving my boat exactly where it belonged. What followed over the subsequent months was a slow, methodical unraveling of exactly how deep Preston's deception had gone. Ingrid's investigation, combined with the bank's own internal review, eventually revealed that Preston had forged not just the boat loan, but had also, in the 18 months since Alina's death, quietly diverted nearly $60,000 total from various accounts and financial instruments I'd given him limited access to manage. A circumflex money he'd used, piece by piece, to service debts from his failed cryptocurrency venture. And disturbingly, debts owed to individuals whose names appeared. Upon Ingrid's further digging, in connection with several other financial fraud investigations across the state, Preston was ultimately charged with identity theft, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. A circumflex, a specific and serious charge in Wisconsin, given my age and the circumstances of my grief when he'd first initiated the scheme. He pleaded guilty eventually, in exchange for a reduced sentence, to a package of charges that resulted in 4 years in state prison and a restitution order requiring him to repay every dollar he'd taken. Though Ingrid warned me honestly that full restitution, given his already precarious finances, might take considerably longer than the length of his sentence to actually collect. Renata filed for divorce 3 weeks after that October morning, a decision she made. She told me later, not solely because of what Preston had done to me, but because of the crueler realization that had crystallized watching him film my humiliation in that driveway. A circumflex the understanding that whatever love she'd once believed existed in their marriage had, at some point she couldn't precisely pinpoint, curdled into something that could watch a vulnerable, grieving old man lose his most treasured possession and see, in that moment, not tragedy but opportunity. I still keep the Aliner docked at the same marina where she's been for 6 years, and I take her out most Sunday mornings when the weather allows, out onto the water that Aliner herself loved more than any other place on this earth. And I think on those mornings about how close I came to losing the one tangible piece of joy I'd allowed myself to keep in the wake of losing my wife, not to any storm or mechanical failure or bad luck, but to a man I'd welcomed into my family with an open hand, who had looked at my grief and my trust and seen, in both of them, nothing more than an opportunity to be exploited. Renata comes out on the boat with me most weekends now, the two of us rebuilding slowly, a relationship that Preston's deception nearly poisoned along with everything else. And I have come to understand something in the months since that October dawn that I wish I'd understood decades earlier. That love, real love, the kind Aliner and I shared for 34 years, never once required a person to film the moment someone they claimed to love hit rock bottom. It only ever required standing beside them, working to lift them back up. The Repo truck never came back, but I check the title documents on that boat every single month now, without fail, a small ritual of vigilance I never once thought I'd need to practice, and a quiet reminder of exactly how much can be taken from a person by someone who smiles warmly across a Thanksgiving table while planning, all along, precisely how much of you they intend to take.